Picture a world swallowed by endless winter, where the wind howls through barren trees like a chorus of forgotten spirits, and the land lies frozen beneath a sky heavy with storms. This is the realm of the Cailleach, the ancient Celtic goddess who commands the coldest months with a voice as sharp as ice and a presence as vast as the mountains themselves. She is winter incarnate, a force of nature wrapped in myth, both feared and revered for her power to shape the world with a single swing of her staff. But beneath the frost and fury lies a deeper mystery, a goddess who doesn't just bring destruction but also creation, weaving life and death into the very fabric of the land. Her name echoes through centuries of folklore, whispered in tales that paint her as the ultimate sovereign of the wild. She sculpts valleys with her footsteps and summons blizzards with a glance, yet she's also the guardian of sacred wells, the protector of herds, and the unseen hand that guides the turning of the seasons. How can one being embody such opposites? That's the enigma of the Cailleach, a deity as complex as the winter itself, neither purely benevolent nor wholly cruel, but a balance of both. And today we're unraveling 30 of her most captivating legends, stories that reveal her many faces, the storm-bringer, the shape-shifter, the ancient queen who rules the threshold between worlds. Imagine standing on the edge of a snow-laden forest, feeling the crisp air bite your skin as the first flakes of a coming storm begin to fall. That's the moment the Cailleach steps into the world, her presence humming in the wind. Her tales are etched into the landscape she shaped, the jagged cliffs of Scotland, the rolling hills of Ireland, even the quiet glens where her name is still spoken with a mix of awe and caution. By the time we're done, you'll see winter through new eyes, not just as a season, but as a living legend, a goddess who walks among us in the crunch of snow and the whisper of the north wind. So bundle up and let's step into her world. The stories waiting for us are as vast and untamed as the winters she commands. Before time had a name, when the world was still soft and unshaped, the Cailleach strode across the land with her great apron weighed down by stones. Every step she took left valleys in her wake, and every handful of rocks she scattered became a mountain. Picture her towering, ancient, her weathered hands shaping the earth itself as casually as a child building mounds in the sand. This is how the Scottish Highlands were born, not through slow shifts of tectonic plates, but by the will of a goddess who carved the land with her own two hands. Take Ben Nevis, the tallest peak in all of Britain. Folks say it was one of the last stones she dropped, a final anchor tossed from her apron before the last light faded from the sky. Even now, if you stand at its base and listen closely, you might hear the echo of her footsteps in the wind, like the land itself remembers her touch. But she didn't just build mountains, she made the wild places where storms gather and rivers cut deep. Glencoe's sharp cliffs, those are the marks of her nails, scraped across the earth as she dragged her fingers through stone. The jagged ridges of the Cairngorms, that's where she shook out her apron, letting the last pebbles tumble where they pleased. What's fascinating is how the legends match the land. Geologists will tell you how glaciers sculpted these valleys, how ice and time wore down the rock. But the old stories whisper of something else. They tell of a goddess who didn't just shape the land, but infused it with her spirit. The rivers that burst from her tears, the caves where she slept between winters, even the way the mist clings to the peaks, all of it carries her presence. She wasn't just a builder, she was the land itself, breathing life into every cliff and moor, and that's the heart of the Cailleach's power. She didn't create the highlands and walk away. She stayed woven into them, her stories etched into every slope and hollow. Even today, farmers leave offerings at certain stones, knowing she's the one who decides whether the winter will be cruel or kind. The mountains aren't just rocks, they're her bones, her legacy. So next time you see a storm roll over the highlands, remember, that's not just weather. That's the Cailleach stirring the winds with her staff, still shaping the world as she's done since the dawn of time. On the rugged Beara Peninsula, where the Atlantic pounds against jagged cliffs and salt spray hangs thick in the air, the Cailleach takes on another name, the Hag of Beara. Here, she isn't just a winter goddess, she's a fixture of the land itself, a figure carved into the very rock she once ruled. Locals will point to a weather-beaten stone outcrop near the village of Iries, its silhouette unmistakably human. They say that's her, frozen mid-gaze, her face forever turned toward the sea she loved. But how did a being of such boundless power become trapped in stone? The answer lies in a tale as old as the tides. Some say she grew weary of her immortality, watching centuries roll by like waves against the shore. Others claim she made a desperate bargain, trading her freedom for the safety of the fishing villages she protected. But the most haunting version tells of a love lost to the sea. Day after day, she'd perch on these cliffs, waiting for a sailor who never returned, until grief turned her heart as cold as the stone beneath her feet. Over time, her body followed, hardening into the formation we see today. Yet even in stone, she's far from powerless. Fishermen still leave small offerings, a shell, a coin, a bit of wool, knowing the hag controls more than just winter. She commands the fertility of the land, the abundance of the herds, even the temper of the ocean itself. What's remarkable is how her story shifts with the seasons. In winter, she's said to awaken, her stone form softening just enough to let her walk the cliffs again, gathering storm clouds in her skirts. Come spring, when the first wildflowers push through the thin soil, locals whisper that she's sleeping, not dead, just dreaming the land back to life. The peninsula seems to breathe with her cycles, brittle and bare when she's active, lush and green when she rests. Even the local place names hold traces of her. That crumbling ring fort atop a hill, that's her winter throne. The erratic boulders dotting the coastline, those are the pebbles she dropped while pacing the shore. Modern visitors might dismiss the hag's stone as just another curious rock formation, until they stand beside it at dusk. There's a charge in the air here, a prickle on the skin like the moment before a thunderclap. Perhaps it's the wind whistling through the cracks, or perhaps it's something older, something that remembers when the Cailleach walked these cliffs not as stone but as a goddess. Either way, one thing's certain, on the Beara Peninsula, the line between myth and landscape doesn't just blur, it vanishes altogether. There's a stretch of sea between Scotland's islands where the water doesn't just churn, it roars. The Corryvreckan whirlpool, a gaping maw of white foam and black currents, is where the Cailleach goes to shake winter loose from her cloak. Picture her standing knee-deep in the fury of the tide, her great plaid a tapestry woven from storm clouds and shadows plunged into the whirlpool's heart. As the fabric thrashes against the water, the threads unravel into gusts of wind, the dyes bleed into sleet, and the very act of washing becomes a ritual that wakes the sleeping cold. This is how winter arrives, not with a whisper, but with the scream of water against stone, the goddess spinning tempests from cloth. The old folks say the whirlpool's roar grows louder for 3 days straight when she comes, those final, furious breaths of winter before the year tips toward spring. On the first day, the winds climb down from her plaid, howling through glens and rattling loose shutters. By the second, the sea itself rises to meet her, waves carving new shapes into the cliffs as if the land remembers it too must bend to her will. But it's the third day that holds the real power, when the Cailleach wrings out the last drops from her plaid and the sky goes quiet. That hush isn't surrender, it's the moment she decides whether to let go. Some years she lingers, twisting the damp fabric tighter until frost claws at the first green shoots. Other years she loosens her grip, letting the cloth drip itself dry as the whirlpool stills, spent. What's chilling isn't just the storm, but the precision of it. Fishermen still time their voyages by those 3 days, knowing the whirlpool's rage is more than natural, it's divine. Even modern weather maps show a peculiar pressure drop over the Corryvreckan in late winter, as if science is just catching up to what the legends always knew. There are stories of those who tried to sail through her washing days, mistaking the goddess's work for ordinary squalls. Their boats didn't sink, they vanished, swallowed whole by a force older than the sea itself. Yet there's a tenderness here too. The same plaid that brings blizzards also cradles the seed sleeping beneath the soil. When she finally folds it away, the fabric leaves behind a scatter of dew, each droplet a promise that the land will wake when she's ready. That's the duality of the Cailleach. Her hands bring the freeze, but her cloak is the blanket that keeps the earth alive until spring. So when the Corvrecken roars, listen close. That's not just water turning, that's the sound of the world being remade, one thread at a time. High in the snow-dusted glens of the Scottish Highlands, where the trees grow sparse and the wind carries the scent of frost, the Cailleach takes on another of her many roles, keeper of the wild herds. She moves through these landscapes not with the fury of a storm, but with the quiet authority of a shepherd, her great staff tapping against frozen earth as she guides the deer where she wills. To see her at this work is to witness something rare, a goddess who doesn't just command the elements but bends the very instincts of beasts to her hand. The old hunters tell of winter nights when the deer move in patterns no tracker can explain, their hoofprints circling ancient standing stones or vanishing abruptly at the edge of a loch. That's her doing. With a single strike of her staff against the roots of an oak, she can summon them from miles away, their breath steaming in the air as they gather like shadows around her. Some say she marks their antlers with a touch of frost, a sign that these are hers, and no arrow should find them unless she allows it. There's a reason certain clans still leave a portion of their hunt at lone cairns or beneath twisted hawthorns. They're not just paying respect to the forest, they're bargaining with the one who decides which herds will thrive and which will thin. But her connection to the deer runs deeper than control. In the leanest winters, when the snow piles higher than a man's waist, she's been spotted leading them to hidden valleys where the wind can't reach, where the last stubborn blades of grass cling to life beneath the ice. It's in these moments she reveals her duality again. The same hand that brings the blizzard also lifts the deer's muzzle toward shelter. Even her staff tells a story. Carved from rowan wood that never rots and tipped with a shard of glacier ice, it doesn't just herd, it blesses. The deer that pass beneath its arc are said to bear stronger fawns, their coats thick against the cold, their steps sure even on the slickest stone. Modern ecologists might call this predator-prey balance, but the legends know better. The Cailleach doesn't just manage the herds, she embodies the pact between hunter and hunted. When a stag falls to a wolf's jaws or a well-placed arrow, that's her will too, a reminder that life and death are two sides of the same frozen coin. Some even claim the famous fairy cattle of Scottish lore, those spectral red deer that vanish into the mist, are really her doing. She'll spirit away an entire herd one night, only to return them weeks later, their numbers mysteriously replenished. To walk these glens in winter is to feel the truth of it. The way the deer pause mid-step, ears twitching toward some unheard call. The way their eyes reflect the moonlight like chips of ice, not with fear but recognition. They know her as the land knows her, and if you're very quiet, very still, you might hear it too. The distant tap of a staff against stone, the whisper of hooves on snow, and the low hum of a goddess at work. At the edge of a forgotten glen, where the shadows stretch long even at midday, lies a spring so clear it reflects not the sky above, but the face you wore in your youth. This is the Cailleach's well, a pool of black water ringed by ice even in summer, its surface still as glass until the goddess herself stirs it with her staff. To drink from it is to feel time unwind in your veins, your bones lightening, your skin smoothing as though decades are slipping away like winter snow in spring. But this isn't some simple fountain of youth. It's a threshold between lifetimes, a place where the Cailleach doesn't just halt aging, but reshapes it entirely. The legends whisper of warriors who stumbled upon it by accident, men with hair white as birch bark who knelt to drink and rose with the dark curls of their 20s restored. But there's always a catch. Some returned home to find their children had grown older than them, their wives gray-haired strangers. Others found their memories fraying, their pasts dissolving like mist. The well doesn't just turn back the clock, it severs the threads of your story, leaving you unmoored. That's the Cailleach's lesson. Rebirth isn't a gift but a reckoning. She doesn't offer eternal youth, but cycles each sip a death of who you were, each drop a birth into something new. Sacred water sources like this dot the Celtic world, from holy springs to hidden crannog pools, but the Cailleach's well is different. While others heal or bless, hers transforms. The Irish Tobar Segai's, home of the salmon of wisdom, grants knowledge, but the Cailleach's well demands exchange. Leave an offering of winter berries, and the water might show you your next life in its depths. Bring a lock of hair from your firstborn, and it could steep your years back into your limbs. The darkest tales tell of those who tried to take without giving. They didn't age, but withered instead, their bodies folding in on themselves like trees petrified by frost. The symbolism runs deep. In a land where rivers freeze and thaw with the seasons, water isn't just life, it's time itself, flowing in endless loops. The Cailleach doesn't just guard the well, she is the well, her own existence a cycle of decay and renewal. Some say she drinks from it each Samhain, shedding her ancient form to walk the world as a maiden until winter returns. Others claim the well is her first creation, dug with her fingernails when the world was young, its waters mixed with her own breath. Even its location shifts, sometimes in a cave behind a waterfall, other times beneath the roots of a lone thorn tree, always just beyond the corner of your vision. Modern seekers still scour the Highlands for it, armed with old maps and half-remembered rhymes. They're looking in the wrong places. The well isn't found, it finds you, appearing when your need is greatest, or when the Cailleach decides you're ready to pay its price. There's a reason so many who claim to have found it can't locate it again. It's not a place, but a moment, the split second between exhaling and inhaling, between the last star fading and the sun rising. That's the secret. Rebirth isn't a location. It's the pause in the goddess's breath, the space between her heartbeats, and when she lets you step inside it, you don't come back the same. The turning of the year hinges on a single, fierce moment, the clash between the Cailleach and Brigd, a battle as old as the soil itself. On Imbolc, when the first timid shoots push through frost-hardened earth, these two goddesses meet not with swords, but with the weight of seasons behind them. The Cailleach, wrapped in her cloak of gale winds and hoarfrost, stands her ground, unwilling to relinquish her grip on the sleeping land. Brigd arrives with sunlight caught in her hair and the scent of newborn lambs clinging to her skirts, her very presence a challenge to winter's reign. This isn't just a myth, it's the turning point of the agricultural year, where the fate of crops, cattle, and communities hangs in the balance. Listen closely to how the old tales describe their struggle. Some say the Cailleach gathers every last ounce of winter's bitterness and hurls it at Brigd in one final blizzard, a storm so fierce it snaps ancient oaks like twigs. But Brigd doesn't fight back with force. She kneels instead, pressing her palms into the frozen ground until the earth remembers warmth. Where her fingers touch, snowdrops erupt like muttered promises of spring. Other versions claim the Cailleach doesn't oppose Brigd at all, but tests her. She'll freeze the hem of Brigd's dress solid, only to nod in approval when the younger goddess shakes off the ice without complaint. Because here's the truth neither side admits openly: they need each other. Without the Cailleach's harshness, Brigd's gentleness would mean nothing. Without Brigd's insistence on renewal, the Cailleach's winter would stretch into eternity. The rituals of Imbolc mirror this tension perfectly. Families would scatter ashes from the hearth across fields, a symbolic defiance of frost, yet they'd leave a portion of bread or milk on the doorstep for the Cailleach, acknowledging her lingering power. Even Brigd's sacred flame, kindled in village squares, was often lit from embers kept alive through the darkest months. The message was clear: fire doesn't conquer cold so much as inherit it. Modern gardeners still feel this dance in their bones when they plant frost-resistant seeds weeks before the last freeze, hedging their bets between Brigd's hope and the Cailleach's stubbornness. What's often forgotten is how personal this battle gets. The Cailleach isn't some faceless force of nature. She's the grandmother who knows exactly which hillside berries will survive a late frost, who remembers every lamb born too early and lost to her winds. Brigd isn't just spring's herald, she's the midwife who's been waiting since Samhain to deliver the land from its icy womb. When they face off, it's not as enemies but as counterparts bound by a shared purpose. The Cailleach's retreat isn't defeat, it's the slow exhale of a job well done, the land hardened and ready for what comes next. Brigd's victory isn't dominance, but the careful uncurling of a fist that's been clenched for months. Pay attention to the land itself in those precarious weeks after Imbolc. One morning, you'll find puddles rimmed with brittle ice, the Cailleach's fingerprints lingering on the world. By afternoon, those same puddles might ripple with the first buzzing insects, Brigd's answering laughter. Farmers know better than to trust the weather until the Cailleach finally gathers her snows and retreats to the highest peaks where she'll sleep until autumn. But even then, she's not gone. She's waiting, dreaming of the day the cycle will turn again, when she'll stride back into the valleys and remind the world that all growth begins with rest, all warmth is sweeter for having known the cold. High in the windswept valley of Glen Cailleach, nestled between peaks that scrape the sky, stands a small stone hut unlike any other. Its walls are rough-hewn, its roof long gone to time, but inside rests something extraordinary, a collection of weathered stones shaped vaguely like human figures. This is Tig Nam Bodach, the House of the Old Man. Though locals know the truth, these stones aren't just carvings. They're the Cailleach and her family, left here centuries ago to watch over the glen. Step inside and the air changes thicker, cooler, as though the stones breathe. The largest figure sits at the center, her surface smoothed by countless hands. She's flanked by smaller stones said to be her children or perhaps her attendants, their features worn but their presence undeniable. For generations, farmers in the area performed a ritual as precise as the turning seasons. In early summer, they'd carefully carry the stones outside, placing them where they could watch the crops grow. Come winter, they'd return them to the hut, tucking the Cailleach away like a cherished but formidable elder who needed rest. Ignore this ritual, and the stories warn of sudden frosts in June or blizzards that would smother newborn lambs. What's remarkable isn't just the longevity of this practice, but its intimacy. Unlike grand temples or sweeping ceremonies, this was domestic worship, the kind woven into the daily rhythm of survival. Women would leave offerings of wool or barley at the hut's entrance, whispering requests for easy births or healthy children. Shepherds anointed the stones with oil from their lanterns, a silent prayer for the flocks to endure the cold. Even the act of moving the stones wasn't just symbolic, it was a tactile conversation with the divine. Each scrape of rock against palm, a reminder that the Cailleach was no distant deity, but a neighbor, a matriarch whose mood shaped every meal and harvest. Archaeologists might dismiss Tig Nam Bodach as a curious anomaly, but the land tells a different story. The valley's microclimate is notoriously unpredictable, a fact the old tales attribute to the Cailleach's whims. Modern meteorologists record bizarre temperature dips near the hut, unexplained even by the surrounding topography. Coincidence, perhaps, but when you stand there, feeling the stones hum faintly under your fingertips as the wind howls through the glen, it's hard not to wonder if some forces resist measurement. The true power of these stone thrones lies in their duality. They're both shelter and sentinel, objects of reverence and practicality. Some say the figures aren't representations of the Cailleach at all, but vessels places where she chooses to dwell when the modern world grows too loud. Others claim the stones are her anchors, tethering her to our realm so she doesn't vanish entirely with the fading of the old ways. Either way, one truth remains. In Glen Cailleach, the line between geology and godhood doesn't just blur, it crumbles. Touch those worn surfaces and you're not just touching rock, you're touching time itself and the hands of everyone who came before you, reaching across centuries to steady the balance between winter and the world. Beneath the frozen surface of sovereignty myths lies a truth as sharp as winter's first frost. No king truly rules without the Cailleach's consent. Across Celtic lore, she appears at crossroads and coronations, her form bent with age, her cloak ragged, a deliberate test disguised as frailty. This is no ordinary hag, but the land itself in human guise, offering power with gnarled hands to those brave or foolish enough to accept it. The loathly lady tales, echoed from Irish hills to Arthurian courts, all whisper the same lesson. True rulership isn't seized from the strong, but given by the forgotten. Consider the story of Niall of the 9 hostages, the legendary Irish king. Thirsty and lost in a forest, he stumbles upon a well guarded by a crone with cracked lips and matted hair. She demands a kiss in exchange for water, a simple price that sends his brothers fleeing in disgust. But Niall doesn't hesitate. His lips meet hers, and in that instant her wrinkles smooth into youth, her rags shimmer into royal robes. The transformation isn't magic, it's revelation. By embracing what others rejected, he proves his fitness to rule. The Cailleach, now radiant as sovereignty incarnate, doesn't just grant him water. She hands him the land itself, whispering the secret all great rulers know. A kingdom thrives only when its leader sees beauty in the broken. The parallels run deep. In the Welsh tale of Petrified, a knight's refusal to aid a loathly woman curses him with failure, while in Scotland's Marriage of Sir Gawain, the hag's demand for a husband reveals which knight possesses true nobility. These aren't disjointed folk tales, but fragments of an older ritual, one where the Cailleach played high priestess in the sacred drama of kingship. Historians trace this motif to ancient inauguration rites, where rulers symbolically wed the land through union with a crone figure. The stones of Tara still bear the imprint where prospective kings would clasp the Lia Fail, Ireland's coronation stone, while a wise woman chanted, "Take this land as your bride, and she will take you as her lord if you prove worthy." What makes the Cailleach's role so fascinating is its subversion of power dynamics. She doesn't kneel to kings, they kneel to her, often without realizing it. When the legendary Con of the 100 Battles encounters her as a grey-cloaked stranger washing a bloody armor in a ford, she's not a mere omen, she's the architect of his fate, dividing future reigns with the precision of a goddess carving winter from autumn. Even Arthurian legends, polished by medieval romance, retain this core truth. The loathly lady who torments Gawain isn't just testing his courtesy. She's the Cailleach in disguise, measuring his capacity to honor what society deems unlovable. Modern leaders would do well to heed these myths. The Cailleach's test transcends medieval pageantry. It's a mirror for any who wield power. Can you recognize strength in the marginalized? Will you drink from wells dug by hands society scorns? The land, like the hag, remembers every kindness and slight. Those who pass her test don't just gain a crown, they inherit the resilience of mountains, the endurance of frost-hardened soil. Those who fail, they become footnotes in her endless winter, their names lost like leaves in the wind. So the next time you face someone the world calls ugly or useless, look closer. That bent spine might be the backbone of a kingdom, those cracked lips shaping the words that will crown or condemn the next ruler. The Cailleach never retired. She just waits, patient as ice, for us to remember where true sovereignty lies. When the snow piles too deep for deer to run and the wind gnaws at the bones of the starving, the Cailleach doesn't walk alone, she moves with a pack. Wolves shadow her steps through the highland glens, their breath steaming in unison with hers, their yellow eyes reflecting not moonlight but her will. Unlike the Norse Skadi who hunts wolves as trophies or the Roman Lupa who nurtures kings, the Cailleach doesn't tame or conquer them, she becomes them. Their howls are her voice-given teeth, their loping strides an extension of her restless winter wanderings. This isn't mere symbolism. its kinship forged in the leanest months when predator and goddess share one purpose, to remind the world that survival has claws. The old shepherds knew this bond well. They'd tell of winters when the wolves grew bolder, not because game was scarce, but because the Cailleach's staff had tapped the earth, summoning them to her side. Some nights, if you peered through the swirling snow, you might see her, not riding a wolf like a steed, but running among them, her shape flickering between woman and beast as easily as frost melts under spring's first breath. There's a reason Scottish place names like Cailleach, the Hag's Burn, often border territories once thick with wolf packs. These weren't just hunting grounds, they were sacred spaces where the goddess and her companions tested the land's resilience. Compare her to Skadi, the Norse winter huntress who straps on skis to chase wolves across frozen peaks. Skadi masters beasts, the Cailleach merges with them. Where Skadi's wolves are adversaries, foils to her disciplined archery, the Cailleach's pack are collaborators, their instincts woven into her strategies. When she sends them to cull weak deer from the herd, it's not sport but stewardship, ensuring only the strong endure to repopulate come spring. Even their famous howls carry different meanings. Skadi's wolves sing of chaos, their voices the soundtrack to Ragnarok, but the Cailleach's wolves, their chorus is a territorial hymn, mapping the borders of winter itself with sound. Farmers once left offerings at the edge of the forest, raw venison, bowls of cream, not to bribe the wolves away, but to honor their mistress. They understood the terrible balance. Too many wolves meant lost livestock, but none at all meant overgrazed land and weaker herds. The Cailleach enforced this equilibrium with icy precision. Stories tell of greedy hunters who slaughtered entire packs, only to wake the next morning to find their own flocks frozen solid, the Cailleach's footprints circling the carnage. She never punished indiscriminately, though. Those who took just one wolf for protection, who used every part of the animal from pelt to bone, often found their remaining sheep mysteriously spared by the pack's sharp teeth. Modern ecologists would call this apex predator dynamics, but the legends frame it as something deeper, a covenant. The Cailleach's wolves aren't just animals, they're extensions of winter's logic, manifestations of her belief that mercy comes in many forms. Even their disappearance from Scotland mirrors her own retreat from modern consciousness. The last wolf was killed in the late 17th century, roughly when the old ways began fading from memory. Coincidence perhaps, but wander the Highlands today, and you might still feel it, the prickle on your neck when the wind howls through the pines, the shadow that moves just beyond the tree line. The wolves are gone, but the Cailleach remembers, and somewhere in the space between myth and memory, their voices still answer when she calls. Deep in the hollows of the highest peaks, where the wind doesn't just howl but sings in a language older than stone, the Cailleach tends a cauldron that never boils dry. This isn't some ordinary cooking pot. It's a vessel as vast as a mountain's belly, its iron-black sides crusted with salt from sea spray carried inland by her storms. Inside churns the raw stuff of tempests, thunder cracked into jagged fragments, lightning distilled to its essence, and the last sighs of autumn leaves whipped into whirlwinds. When she stirs it with her staff, the sound echoes across glens like the first warning rumble before a squall. This is how winter's fury is born, not by chance, but by the careful, cruel artistry of a goddess who measures out blizzards like a brewer measures hops. The parallels to the Dagda's cauldron are impossible to ignore. Where his mythical vessel never empties of food, hers never exhausts its supply of gales. His cauldron satisfies hunger, hers creates it, brewing the harsh conditions that will test both beast and human alike. But here's the twist: while the Dagda's cauldron rewards the worthy, the Cailleach's serves no one's appetite but her own. She doesn't cook for kings or heroes. Her recipes are written in the language of sleet and hailstones, her servings doled out in the bite of wind through threadbare cloaks. Yet there's a strange generosity in this. Just as the Dagda's cauldron feeds bodies, hers feeds the land itself, the storms ensuring only the hardiest survive to replenish the earth. Legends describe its location differently. Some say it's hidden in the caves beneath Ben Nevis, the steam from its surface rising through fissures to become the mist that wreathes the peak. Others claim it rests at the bottom of Loch Orr, its simmering heat the reason the loch never fully freezes, no matter how bitter the winter. The most haunting tales insist the cauldron moves, carried on the backs of spectral stags to wherever the Cailleach plans her next assault. Wherever it sits, one rule holds true: stumble upon it uninvited, and you'll leave changed. Sailors who have glimpsed its swirling contents in their dreams wake with salt in their lungs, their hair whitened as if by years of squalls. Shepherds who have heard its distant bubbling find their flocks huddled unnaturally close, the animals sensing what's coming long before the first snowflake falls. What makes this cauldron distinct from other mythical vessels is its duality. Unlike the Holy Grail or the Welsh pear Dadani, it doesn't promise resurrection or wisdom, it delivers transformation of a harsher sort. The same storm that sinks ships also scours toxins from the soil. The blizzard that isolates villages for weeks also blankets dormant seeds in protective ice. Even its creation myth reflects this balance. Some say the Cailleach forged it from the last sigh of a dying glacier, hammering the ice into shape with her own frozen breath. Others whisper it was a gift from the sea, washed ashore in a tide of black foam as payment for some long-forgotten bargain. Modern meteorology unwittingly echoes these myths. The way low-pressure systems brew over the Atlantic before sweeping east mirrors the cauldron's described mechanics, a churning center gathering strength before unleashing its contents. Fishermen still refer to certain cloud formations as the Hag's Ladle, those ominous swirls that signal a storm's approach, and scientists studying ocean currents might scoff at the idea of a supernatural cauldron, but they can't deny the uncanny precision with which some storms seem to target specific valleys as if guided by an unseen hand. The cauldron's true power lies in its ambiguity. It's not just a weapon but a tool of renewal. When the Cailleach tips it over to pour snow across the land, she isn't just bringing destruction, she's preparing the earth for what comes next. The ice locks nutrients into the soil. The wind prunes weak branches, making room for new growth. Even the thunder, which folklore claims is the sound of the cauldron's lid rattling, serves a purpose, its vibrations startling dormant seeds awake beneath the frost. This is winter's alchemy, and the Cailleach is its undisputed master. So the next time you hear the gale shrieking through your eaves, remember, that's not just wind. That's the breath of a goddess blowing across the rim of her great, unfathomable cauldron. At dawn, when the mist still clings to the hollows like a second skin, the Cailleach sheds her crone form as easily as a snake sheds its scales. One moment she's an old woman hunched over a frozen stream, her fingers tracing patterns in the ice. The next, she's a golden eagle soaring over the same water, her shadow cutting across the current with predatory grace. This isn't mere disguise, it's transcendence. The Cailleach doesn't just wear the shapes of animals, she becomes their essence, their instincts flowing through her like the north wind through bare branches. Her transformations follow a logic older than written word. As an eagle, she's the all-seeing judge, circling high enough to spot which villages hoarded grain and which shared with their neighbors. As a hare, she's the trickster, darting through snowdrifts to lead hunters on fruitless chases until their legs give out. But her most potent form might be the wolf, already explored in depth, yet even that pales beside the time she's taken the shape of a salmon, silver scales flashing as she navigates frozen rivers to whisper secrets to the fish beneath the ice. Each shape serves a purpose, each skin a tool chosen with the precision of a goddess who's worn the faces of every creature that endures winter's bite. The parallels to Celtic zoomorphic deities run deep. Compare her to the Morrigan, who flits between raven and woman, or Flidais, mistress of wild herds. But where these figures often shift for battle or fertility, the Cailleach's transformations reveal a deeper bond with the land itself. she doesn't just borrow animal forms, she embodies the raw survival instincts of creatures who weather the lean months. When she becomes a snow-white owl, her silent flight isn't just about stealth, it's a living lesson in patience, in waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As a red fox, her tracks zigzagging through fresh powder teach the art of misdirection, of conserving energy when resources run thin. Shamanic traditions echo this intimate connection. Siberian spirit workers speak of animal guides who lend their strengths. Norse tales tell of Filger, ancestral spirits in beast form. The Cailleach predates and surpasses these concepts. She doesn't need a guide, she is the wilderness incarnate, shifting forms not through ritual but by sheer will. There's a reason certain Highland families still claim descent from her animal manifestations. The MacCodrums of the Hebrides proudly called themselves the offspring of the seal, believing their lineage traced back to a time when the Cailleach wore silky skin to swim between islands, leaving half-human children in her wake. Modern encounters with her shape-shifted forms still surface in rural lore. A farmer in Donegal once swore he saw a hare with eyes like chipped ice standing upright in his field, just for a heartbeat before it vanished into a swirl of snow. A mountaineer on Ben Nevis reported an eagle that circled his party for hours, its cry echoing unnaturally in the thin air. Even urban legends get in on the act. Glasgow's fox population supposedly spikes during unseasonable cold snaps, their numbers inexplicable until you remember the Cailleach's fondness for slipping into the city unseen, her russet fur blending with the autumn leaves. The true brilliance of her transformations lies in their ambiguity. Unlike Zeus's dramatic metamorphoses or Loki's playful deceptions, the Cailleach's shifts are seamless, organic. She doesn't change shape to deceive or seduce, but to experience the world through different senses, to feel the scrape of talons on rock, the twitch of whiskers in the wind. When she becomes a stag, it's not to flee or fight, but to remember what it's like to carry the weight of antlers, to understand the burdens of the creatures who share her winter kingdom. This empathy makes her more than a goddess. It makes her the living pulse of the wild itself, cycling through forms as the year cycles through seasons. Each transformation a reminder that all life is connected by the struggle to endure. Not all the Cailleach's children inherited her full might. Some carried only fragments of her power, scattering like storm-tossed leaves across the land. Among them stride the Bodach, a grizzled old man of the winds who rattles cottage roofs with his cough, and the Cailleachan, fierce young storm hags who race through glens on howling gusts. These lesser spirits don't command winter's breadth. They personify its fleeting rages, the sudden squall that drowns a harvest, the freak hailstorm that strips bark from ancient oaks. To call them mere weather phenomena misses the point. They're the Cailleach's echoes, her unfinished verses, each carrying a sliver of her fury tailored to the valleys they haunt. Take the Bodach, whose name means simply old man. He's winter's grumbling uncle, shuffling through the highlands with a sack full of sleet slung over his bony shoulder. Fishermen on loch ness still warn of his approach when the water turns unnaturally still and the air hums with tension. That's the Bodach drawing breath before unleashing a gale. Unlike his mother's continent-spanning tempests, his winds are petty but precise. He'll flatten one crofter's haystack while leaving the neighbors untouched, as if playing cruel games with those who displease him. The Hebridean custom of leaving a dram of whiskey on the windowsill during storms, that's not for the Cailleach, it's bribery for her cantankerous son, a plea to divert his spite elsewhere. Then there are the Cailleachan, her wild daughters. These aren't solitary figures but a shrieking sisterhood, their voices harmonizing in the gales that tear through Glen Lyon each March. Local lore claims they were born from icicles the Cailleach plucked from her own hair and breathed life into a litter of storm spirits with razor-sharp fingernails and tempers to match. Their signature move, the Shia Geith or fairy wind, a miniature tornado that whips through a single field, lifting nothing but a shepherd's hat or an unsecured gate before vanishing. Farmers once read these capricious gusts like omens. If the Cailleach stole your laundry, you'd have a mild winter. If they spared your property but uprooted a holy well's offering stone, famine loomed. The Isle of Skye holds the darkest tale of these wayward children. Near the Querang's twisted rock formations, they tell of a Cailleach named Bronach, the Sorrowful One. Unlike her sisters who revel in chaos, Bronach's storms weep. Her story goes that she was the Cailleach's favorite until she tried to outdo her mother by freezing an entire bay to save a drowning child. The Cailleach, furious at this unsanctioned mercy, bound Bronach to a sea cliff where her tears became the salt spray that still stings travelers' faces. Now, when a warm rain falls amidst winter, old-timers murmur that Bronach's trying again to soften her mother's heart. What's haunting is how these localized spirits reflect human relationships with microclimates. The Bodach's personality shifts by region. In Aberdeenshire, he's a prankster. In Argyll, a brooding menace. The Cailleach's numbers vary too. Some glens swear there are 7 sisters, others claim 13, mirroring the unpredictable nature of scattered squalls. Even modern meteorology acknowledges these hyper-localized weather patterns, though it calls them orographic effects instead of spirits. Science confirms what folklore always knew: weather has memory. The same hill that catches the Bodach's breath year after year really does have its own microclimate, shaped by the very geography the Cailleach sculpted millennia ago. Perhaps that's the deepest truth hidden in these lesser legends. The Cailleach's children aren't just footnotes to her epic, they're proof that winter isn't a monolith. It's a chorus of individual voices, each singing the same song of frost and wind, but in dialects only their valleys understand. Listen closely next time a sudden gust slams your door shut or an odd patch of fog clings to one lone tree. That's not the weather being strange, that's the Cailleach's lost children whispering that even the smallest storms have stories. Long before the first sword was drawn in battle or the first winter famine gripped the land, the Cailleach's voice would rise above the wind, not as a howl but as a prophecy carved into frost. Her visions didn't come in riddles or vague omens, they arrived with the clarity of ice cracking underfoot. A shepherd might stumble upon her atop a cairn at dawn, her fingers tracing patterns in the hoarfrost that spelled out the exact month his flocks would perish. A clan chief lost in a snowstorm would hear her laughter echo through the glen, and by its direction know whether to march his warriors south or hold the line. This wasn't just foresight, it was a divine ledger, her words as binding as the frozen rivers she commanded. One chilling tale from the Isle of Mull recounts how she appeared to 2 rival chieftains on the eve of a bloody feud. To the first, she pointed her staff at a rowan tree split by lightning, its charred trunk crawling with ants. To the second, she cupped a handful of snow in her palms, letting it melt into a single drop of water. Neither understood in the moment, but by spring, the signs revealed themselves. The first chieftain's line would fracture like the tree, his kin turning on each other like scavenging insects. The second would see his forces dissolve, outmaneuvered by a foe who struck like sunlight on snow. The Cailleach didn't just predict these outcomes, she'd shaped them, her prophecies woven into the fabric of winter itself. This gift mirrors the Morrigan's famous foresight, but with a crucial difference. Where the Morrigan's prophecies often centered on the chaos of war, crows gathering over doomed warriors, rivers running red, the Cailleach's visions were rooted in the land's slow, inexorable cycles. She didn't just foresee battles, she foretold which valleys would freeze solid before harvest, which salmon runs would fail, which clans would starve unless they shared their grain. Her predictions were less about fate and more about consequence, less about inevitability and more about the choices that could still alter the course of her warnings. A striking example survives in the oral traditions of Glen Etive. During a year of unnatural warmth, the Cailleach appeared to a village elder as a hare with eyes like polished slate. She led him to a spring that had run dry, then scratched 3 marks into the mud with her hind legs. the elder counted 3 moons of plenty before the drought would come and rallied his people to store extra barley. When neighboring clans scoffed, he showed them the marks already filling with water from an overnight rain, the Cailleach's message dissolving as her deadline passed. Those who listened survived the famine. Those who didn't learn too late that her prophecies weren't guesses but transactions. Ignore them and you weren't defying destiny, you were refusing her terms. The mechanics of her foresight reveal her deeper connection to time itself. Some legends claim she reads the future in the patterns of migrating geese, their formations spelling out coming storms like living runes. Others say she listens to the whispers of stones, their glacial scars holding memories of winters yet to come. But the most haunting version comes from the Outer Hebrides, where they swear she doesn't predict the future at all, she remembers it. To her, time isn't a line but a spiral, each winter looping back on itself with slight variations. When she warns of a coming blizzard, it's because she's already lived it 1,000 times before, her memory stretching back further than the oldest peat bog. Modern meteorologists might dismiss this as primitive weather lore, but the records tell another story. The so-called Cailleach's Almanac, a collection of passed-down predictions from the Scottish Highlands, shows an uncanny accuracy when compared to climatic data from the Little Ice Age. Certain prophecies, like the warning of 3 white moons before the black harvest, align precisely with years of volcanic ash veiling the sky, causing crop failures across Europe. Coincidence, perhaps, but when the same patterns echo across centuries, it's hard not to wonder if the Cailleach's prophecies were less about magic and more about an ancient, granular understanding of ecological rhythms lost to modern science. What makes her role as seer so compelling is its intimacy. Unlike the Morrigan, who often delivered prophecies as cryptic threats, the Cailleach tailored her warnings to those who knew how to listen. A farmer might find his fence posts frosted in strange runes only his grandmother could decipher. A child gathering firewood would hear her voice in the creaking of a birch tree, the words making sense only when the first livestock fell ill weeks later. Her prophecies weren't meant for kings or heroes, but for the hands that worked the soil and tended the herds, the ones who understood that winter wasn't just a season but a conversation. And like any conversation, ignoring it didn't make it disappear. It just made the reckoning louder when it finally came. When the first true cold of the year bites through the last autumn leaves, that's when you'll hear it, a single, sharp crack echoing across the hills like a tree splitting in the night. That's the sound of the Cailleach's staff striking the earth, a divine hammer blow that turns soft soil to iron-hard frost. Farmers from the Scottish lowlands to the Irish Midlands once marked this moment in their almanacs with a simple, shuddering phrase, "The staff has fallen." It wasn't just folklore, it was an agricultural deadline, the signal to finish last-minute harvests or accept that whatever remained unharvested now belonged to winter. The mechanics of this myth reveal its deep ties to survival. Unlike a whimsical fairy tale, the Cailleach's act was precise, almost surgical. She didn't freeze the entire landscape at once, but targeted specific areas, a waterlogged field in Donegal one night, a sloping pasture in the Grampians the next. Old hedging traditions even dictated patterns for protecting crops. Circles of rowan berries hung on fence posts, or the last sheaf of grain left unharvested as an offering to appease her. These weren't superstitious gestures but calculated defenses rooted in centuries of observing her patterns. The moment her staff struck, the ground didn't just chill, it locked shut, sealing away tender roots and late-sown seeds until her grip loosened in spring. Archaeology backs up the legend's practicality. Excavations of ancient Celtic settlements show granaries strategically placed on south-facing slopes where the Cailleach's staff was said to land last. Soil studies reveal layers of charcoal and bracken deliberately buried in fields' early frost barriers that mirrored the myth's warnings. Even the timing aligns with modern climatology. The freezing date in these oral traditions consistently falls within days of the first recorded ground frosts in medieval meteorological records. But here's where the story twists. The Cailleach didn't wield her staff out of pure malice. In the Outer Hebrides, crofters told of her testing the land's resilience, striking lightly where the soil was healthy, brutally where it was exhausted from overuse. A well-tended field might only develop a thin crust of frost, while a neglected one would freeze solid down to the subsoil. This wasn't punishment, it was ecology disguised as divine intervention, forcing humans to adapt to the land's limits. The rituals surrounding her staff strike were as elaborate as they were vital. In the Highlands, families would gather the night before the predicted freeze to put the bed to rest, a ritual where they'd stack hay bales around fruit trees like blankets, murmuring rhymes about the Cailleach's tired bones. Breton fishermen's wives would toss handfuls of salt into their hearths, the crackling mimicking the sound of freezing earth to preempt her strike. These weren't just quaint customs, they were psychological preparations, ways of asserting some control over an unstoppable natural force. Modern agronomists might scoff at attributing frost patterns to a mythical staff, but they can't deny the observational wisdom embedded in these tales. The Cailleach's supposed whims align eerily with the behavior of Arctic high-pressure systems, the same ones that still trigger sudden temperature drops today. And those old folk calendars, their accuracy often rivals contemporary long-range forecasts, pinpointing the first freeze within a 3-day window year after year. What's most fascinating is how the legend evolved regionally. In County Kerry, where the Gulf Stream softens winters, the Cailleach's staff was said to land gently, leaving pockets of unfrozen ground for early lambs. In the Cairngorms, where cold comes early and stays late, she supposedly wielded it like a weapon, shattering the earth so thoroughly that spring couldn't pry open the soil until May. These variations weren't inconsistencies, they were hyper-local climate knowledge encoded in divine imagery, a map of microclimates disguised as a goddess's moods. So the next time you scrape frost from your windshield or feel the crunch of frozen grass underfoot, listen closely, that brittle snap beneath your boots. That's the echo of the Cailleach's staff, still ringing through the centuries, still teaching the same harsh lesson. Winter doesn't negotiate, it announces. And whether you call it meteorology or mythology, the wise have always known. When the ground hardens, it's time to adapt or endure. On the eve of Lugnasad, when the first golden grains bow heavy under their own weight, the Cailleach doesn't retreat. She stands her ground, her frost-laced fingertips tightening around her staff. But this time, the sun doesn't just rise. It strides toward her in the form of Lug, the radiant god whose very footsteps melt the frost before it can form. Their confrontation isn't some grand battle with clashing swords and shattered mountains. It's subtler, deadlier, a cosmic game of strategy where every ray of sunlight and every gust of wind carries the weight of a kingdom's fate. The oldest versions of this myth, preserved in whispers across the Isle of Man and the Scottish borders, describe the turning point with eerie simplicity. Lug doesn't overpower the Cailleach through brute force. Instead, he outwits her, using the one thing she can't freeze, time itself. As she raises her staff to summon an early blizzard, he plays the harp he crafted from the bones of a year-old stag, its strings tuned to the lengthening days. The music doesn't battle her cold, it unravels it note by note until her snowflakes dissolve midair like unspoken regrets. In some tellings, he challenges her to a riddle contest, his questions spiraling like the sun's trajectory until she's cornered by her own dwindling shadows. What makes this myth so compelling is how it diverges from other seasonal battles. Unlike the dramatic slaying of winter gods in Norse or Slavic lore, Lug's victory isn't permanent. The Cailleach isn't destroyed, just subdued, her power temporarily leashed. She'll return when the balance shifts again, just as Lug's light will eventually wane. This cyclical humility sets Celtic mythology apart. Even in defeat, the Cailleach is granted dignity, her retreat isn't framed as weakness, but as the necessary surrender that makes renewal possible. Regional variants add striking nuance. In County Kerry, they say Lug traps her in a cave sealed by a boulder that only rolls away when autumn's first gale dislodges it, a poetic nod to how coastal storms herald winter's return. The Hebrides tell of her transforming into a grey mare who gallops into the waves, only to re-emerge months later when the sea spits her onto the shore, reborn. But the most poignant version comes from Donegal, where Lug and the Cailleach are portrayed not as enemies, but as old lovers meeting once more in a dance they've performed since time began. His warmth thaws her icy heart just enough for crops to grow. Her chill prevents his fire from scorching the land. Modern observers can spot echoes of this myth in surprising places. The way early August thunderstorms often break heatwaves mirrors Lug's temporary dominance, his victory never total, always contested. Even the Gaelic festival of Lugnasad, with its hilltop gatherings and trial marriages, reflects this balance. Celebrations include climbing peaks to wrestle with winter's shadow, a ritual reenactment of Lug's triumph that acknowledges the Cailleach's inevitable return. The deeper truth here transcends seasons. This isn't just a story about weather. It's about the tension between preservation and progress, between holding on and letting go. The Cailleach's defeat isn't a conquest, but a concession, proof that even the fiercest forces must yield when their time has passed, and Lug's triumph. It's equally fleeting. His light will fade, his harp falls silent, and the Cailleach will rise again, her staff tapping the rhythm of a world where no season rules forever. At first glance, the Cailleach and the Morrigan seem worlds apart, one a winter hag sculpting mountains with frozen hands, the other a raven-winged phantom guiding warriors to bloody fates. But peel back the layers of their myths, and you'll find threads of the same divine fabric woven through both. Sovereignty ties them together like an invisible cord. The Morrigan offers kingship to those who prove worthy, often appearing as a loathly hag whose embrace bestows legitimacy. Sound familiar? It's the Cailleach's same test transposed to a different landscape. Where the Morrigan wields sovereignty over men and battles, the Cailleach commands the unyielding allegiance of the land itself, rocks, rivers, and blizzards bending to her will as surely as armies obey the Morrigan's prophecies. Their connection to war reveals even deeper parallels. The Morrigan's presence curls like smoke over battlefields, her crows picking at the aftermath. The Cailleach fights her own wars, but hers are waged in silent valleys where winter battles summer, her weapons frost and hunger. Both goddesses share a ruthless practicality. The Morrigan ensures only the strong survive combat, while the Cailleach culls the weak through exposure and scarcity. Listen to how their voices echo. The Morrigan's scream incites warriors to frenzy. The Cailleach's howling winds strip indecision from those caught in her storms. Two sides of the same coin, one sharpened for human conflict, the other for nature's merciless winnowing. Transformation binds them most strikingly. The Morrigan shifts between maiden, mother, and crone, her body a vessel for war's many faces. The Cailleach's changes are no less profound, one moment a bent old woman, the next a crashing wave or a white-tailed eagle soaring over lochs, yet their shape-shifting serves different masters. When the Morrigan becomes a wolf, it's to hunt alongside warriors or prophesy their doom. When the Cailleach takes wolf form, she's shepherding deer through snowdrifts or testing a village's resilience. The same power directed inward toward the land rather than outward toward human drama. Even their relationships with other deities whisper of shared origins. The Morrigan clashes with the Dagda, her sexual encounter with him dripping with both intimacy and manipulation. The Cailleach's dynamic with figures like Brigid carries similar tension, conflict laced with mutual respect, opposition that fuels the turning world. Some scholars suggest they might have sprung from an older, more ambiguous figure, a primordial goddess of sovereignty who fractured into regional variants as cultures diverged. The Morrigan became Ireland's phantom queen, the Cailleach Scotland's wild architect, but both retain traces of that goddess who governed life, death, and the right to rule. Modern pagans often honor them as distinct entities, but the old tales hint at something more fluid. In the borderlands between Irish and Scottish lore, you'll find stories where the lines blur: a battle hag who freezes the blood in warriors' veins, a winter spirit who whispers names of the doomed like a crow calling from the trees. Perhaps they were never entirely separate. Perhaps they're the same face glimpsed through different cultural lenses, one reflected in the sheen of a sword, the other in the ice of a glacial tarn. Either way, their legacy endures, two goddesses who remind us that power wears many masks and that true sovereignty isn't given. It's taken, forged in the crucible of survival, whether on a battlefield or a frozen hillside. Beneath the Cailleach's reputation as a bringer of blizzards lies a quieter, gentler legacy, the art of healing with winter's most resilient plants. While she's known for freezing rivers solid, she also knows which roots thrive under ice, which barks hold warmth even in the deepest cold. Juniper burns blue in her hearth not just to ward off spirits, but to purify the air of sickness. Pine needles steeped in her kettle become tonics for aching lungs. Even the bitterest frost-kissed herbs, yarrow stunted by snow, lichen scraped from wind-blasted stones, hold potent cures in her wrinkled hands. This is the Cailleach's overlooked gift, the wisdom to sustain life when the world seems determined to snuff it out. Healers in the Scottish Highlands still whisper her name when gathering these winter medicinals. There's a particular way to harvest juniper berries after the first hard freeze. When they've sweetened slightly from the cold, their oils concentrated by her touch. Tradition says she marks the best bushes by leaving a single icicle dangling from their branches like a glistening pendant. The Isle of Skye's famous Hag's Yarrow grows only on north-facing cliffs where her shadow lingers longest. Its leaves, chewed raw, can stop bleeding faster than any modern poultice. These aren't random remedies, but a coded language of survival, passed down through generations who learned to read winter's harshness as both threat and apothecary. Herbalists note the paradox in her cures. The same juniper smoke that cleanses a sick room also repels malevolent spirits, a reminder that healing, to the Cailleach, is as much about spiritual balance as physical relief. A 17th-century manuscript from the Outer Hebrides describes a ritual where feverish patients were wrapped in blankets that had been hung overnight in a pine grove, where the hag's breath still moves. The logic was twofold. The resin-scented fabric soothed coughs, while the Cailleach's lingering presence frightened away the ill winds believed to carry disease. Modern science confirms the antimicrobial properties of these evergreens, but folklore insists their true power comes from the goddess who taught humans to use them. The Cailleach's connection to birthing traditions reveals her most surprising role. During harsh winters, midwives would steep a single silverweed root, a plant said to sprout where her staff struck the earth in hot water to ease labor pains. In Donegal, mothers hung juniper boughs over the cradle, not just for protection, but because the scent was thought to carry the Cailleach's blessing. A child raised under its scent would inherit her resilience. Even the timing of herbal treatments followed her rhythms. Medicines made during the dark moon nights, when her power peaked, were considered stronger, their potency drawn from the same cold that made her formidable. What makes her herbal lore unique is its refusal to soften winter's cruelty. These aren't gentle remedies, but fierce ones like tea that jolts the system with bitterness. Pine pitch salves that sting before they soothe. The Cailleach doesn't heal by coddling. She teaches the body to endure, to adapt, just as the juniper bends but doesn't break under the weight of her snows. There's a reason the oldest Gaelic charms invoke her not as a nurturing figure, but as a relentless force. By the yarrow in the hag's hand, by the juniper that bears her brand, let this fever break like ice in spring, hard and fast, not lingering. Contemporary herbalism still honors these principles. Foragers in the Cairngorms report that winter yarrow picked above the tree line has markedly higher levels of beneficial alkaloids. Biochemists attribute this to stress compounds the plants produce to survive the cold, a neat parallel to the Cailleach's philosophy that hardship breeds strength. Even the act of gathering these herbs retains ritual echoes. Proper harvesting requires leaving the first and last plant untouched as tribute, just as hunters once left the finest deer of the herd for her blessing. Perhaps this duality is her greatest lesson. The same blizzards that starve villages also preserve life-saving herbs beneath their drifts. The same hands that sculpt deadly avalanches know the precise pressure needed to crush a pine needle and release its healing oils. Winter, like the Cailleach herself, is never just one thing. It's the destroyer and the physician, the famine and the pharmacy, all woven into the same endless turning wheel. The Cailleach's marriage to the Bodach isn't some grand celestial union, it's a riotous farce of bickering and backhanded affection, a folkloric sitcom playing out in the frozen hills of Scotland. Picture this, the mighty goddess who sculpts mountains with her bare hands, wed to a grumbling old man whose greatest talent is forgetting where he left his hat. Their relationship is winter's own odd couple, blending cosmic power with the absurdity of domestic life, proving even deities aren't immune to the chaos of shared living. Take the infamous tale of the Battle of the Broom. One Hogmanay, the Bodach, tired of his wife's blizzards rattling the roof, tried to sweep the snow from their doorstep with a heather besom. The Cailleach, affronted by this challenge to her authority, promptly turned the broom into an icicle. Undeterred, the Bodach retaliated by hanging his sodden socks over the hearth, a calculated offense, knowing her hatred of dampness. The resulting argument supposedly curled the smoke in their chimney backward for a week and gave the neighboring glen an unseasonal thaw. It's a story still told in the Highlands to explain erratic winter weather, with old-timers nodding sagely when January storms alternate with freak warm spells. The hag and her man are at it again. Their dynamic reveals surprising depth beneath the humor. The Bodach's role as the Cailleach's foil isn't just comic relief, it's a narrative safety valve, tempering her destructive potential through absurdity. When she threatens to freeze Loch Ness solid in a rage, he accidentally leaves their cottage door ajar, forcing her to pause mid-tirade and shout about drafts. His antics humanize her, grounding the goddess of ice in relatable frustrations. Even their quarrels serve a purpose. Folklore claims the Bodach's stolen sips of her storm-brewing cauldron are why some snowfalls arrive half-hearted and slushy, as if diluted by his meddling. Regional variations paint their marriage with different shades of mischief. In Aberdeenshire, the Bodach is a hapless but devoted spouse who misplaces his wife's staff every spring, delaying winter's departure through sheer clumsiness. The Hebrides cast him as a cunning trickster who distracts her with riddles to protect early lambs from frost. But the most poignant version comes from Ulster, where their arguments are said to shape the landscape itself, the Bodach's thrown pots carving out new gullies, the Cailleach's exasperated sighs scouring cliffs bare. It's a reminder that even divine relationships leave marks on the world. Modern relationships might find unexpected wisdom in their chaotic bond. The Cailleach and Bodach don't resolve their differences, they weaponize them. Her blizzards meet his stubborn refusal to wear a proper coat. His snoring legend claims it's what causes the aurora borealis clashes with her need for silence when plotting storms. Yet they endure, their conflicts becoming part of nature's rhythm. There's a reason Scottish crofters would traditionally repair their roofs during the first thaw. It's said to mimic the Bodach patching their cottage after a spat, a symbolic nod to resilience through discord. The true brilliance of these tales lies in their subversion. Unlike Zeus and Hera's toxic squabbles or Odin and Frigg's political partnership, the Cailleach's marriage thrives on petty, creative antagonism. The Bodach doesn't fear his wife's power, he needles it, pokes it, and occasionally steals its thunder, sometimes literally, as in the tale where he uses her hailstones as chess pieces. Their union suggests even the forces of nature need balance, not through opposition, but through the kind of affectionate irritation that keeps gods and humans from taking themselves too seriously. So the next time a winter storm fizzles into rain or a cold snap breaks unexpectedly, smile. Somewhere, an old man is grinning as his goddess wife grumbles into her tea, their eternal domestic drama still writing itself into the weather. At Samhain, when the veil between worlds thins to a whisper, the Cailleach doesn't just walk the land, she claims it. While Briggs' Imbolc brims with the promise of renewal, Samhain's long night belongs entirely to winter's queen. This is her coronation hour, the moment the dying year kneels before her frost-tipped staff. Farmers would leave the last sheaf of harvest uncut, calling it the Cailleach's bed, knowing she'd come to rest there as the seasons turned. But her presence wasn't merely symbolic. Samhain divination rituals pulsed with her influence, every apple peeled and nut cracked on the hearth whispering secrets shaped by her hands. Consider the old practice of ducking for apples. What seems like a playful game held darker undertones, the water's icy grip mirroring the Cailleach's own, the floating fruits representing souls navigating her frozen realm. The first apple snatched was said to reveal how harsh the coming winter would be, unblemished for mild months, bruised or worm-eaten for weeks of blizzards. In the Outer Hebrides, they went further, floating hazelnuts in a tub of meltwater from the first ice of autumn. These weren't just snacks but tiny oracles. If a nut sank straight to the bottom, it meant the Cailleach had marked someone in the household for her winter embrace. Families would watch with bated breath as their fates bobbed in that makeshift cauldron, the surface rippling like the boundary between life and death itself. The contrast with Briggs' Imbolc couldn't be starker. Where Briggs' flames coax green shoots from frozen ground, the Cailleach's Samhain fires are lit to keep her at bay. In County Meath, they'd extinguish all hearths and relight them from a communal bonfire, not just for unity, but to ensure no stray ember invited the goddess's attention. The ashes, collected the next morning, held traces of her judgments, clumped and grey for a prosperous year, fine as bone dust if hardship loomed. Even the iconic jack-o'-lanterns find roots here, turnips hollowed and carved with the Cailleach's face to both ward off and honour her, their guttering candlelight a defiant echo against her endless night. What's often overlooked is how these rituals acknowledged her duality. Samhain wasn't about defeating the Cailleach but negotiating with her. In Scottish Highlands, offerings of bog myrtle, a plant that retains its scent even when dried, were buried at crossroads. The logic was simple. Its enduring fragrance might remind the goddess to be equally merciful in preserving life beneath the snow. Breton families baked cornagoo, crescent-shaped cakes curved like the Cailleach's scythe, both to acknowledge her power and symbolically blunt its edge. This wasn't superstition, but a profound understanding of balance, recognizing that the same force that killed crops also sterilized the soil of pests, that the hand which froze rivers also locked their nutrients in ice until spring. Modern Halloween has diluted these connections, but traces linger. The uncanny stillness of the first frost, the way shadows lengthen unnaturally at dusk, these moments still carry the weight of her presence. Psychologists might call it seasonal effect, but the old tales know better. When the pumpkins glow and the wind carries the scent of wood smoke and decay, that's not just autumn fading. It's the Cailleach settling into her throne, her breath frosting the edges of the world as she prepares to weave another winter into being. And if you listen closely to the rattle of bare branches against your window, you might just hear her laughter, low, resonant, and as ancient as the bones of the hills themselves. Long before the Celts named her, before winter had a goddess to call its own, the Cailleach may have walked the earth as something even older, a giantess whose footsteps carved valleys and whose hands stacked mountains like cairns. The evidence lingers in the landscape itself. Take the Cailleach stones on Scotland's Isle of Lewis, those towering megaliths jutting from the peat like the ribs of some ancient beast. Local legend claims they're not just a Neolithic calendar, but the ruins of the Cailleach's house, abandoned when she grew tired of mortal neighbors. The stone's Gaelic name, Tursachan Challanais, whispers this memory, the sorrowful ones of Cailleach, as if the monolith still mourn her departure. There's a pattern here, from Ireland's seed fields to the standing stones of Brittany. Massive structures often bear her name or lore. The Giant's Ring near Belfast. That's where she's said to have danced with other titans, their circling feet pressing the earth into a perfect ditch. The immense dolmens scattered across Wales and Cornwall. Folktales insist these are her cooking slabs, left overturned when she fled advancing civilizations. Even the natural world holds clues. Fingal's Cave, with its hexagonal basalt columns, was known as Uam Bin, or the Melodious Cave, where the Cailleach hummed storms into existence before giants fell out of fashion. Archaeology offers eerie support. Many megalithic sites align with winter solstice sunrises or lunar standstills, tracking celestial events crucial to agrarian survival. Coincidence, perhaps, but when you stand at the Cailleach stones on a December dawn, watching the low sun thread between pillars like a needle through frost, it's hard not to feel intentionality, as if the stones were less a temple than a seasonal workshop for a being who measured time in centuries, not harvest. The Cailleach's supposed abandonment of these sites mirrors actual history. Many were ritually closed by Bronze Age peoples, their entrances sealed with care, as if containing something too vast to destroy. Comparative mythology deepens the connection. The Norse had their frost giants, the Greeks their titans, primordial beings displaced by newer gods. The Cailleach fits this archetype, but with a twist. Where other giants were vanquished or imprisoned, she simply stepped aside, her power diffusing into the land itself. The Scottish Amphir lieth more, the big grey man of Ben Macdui, a towering figure said to stalk hikers in the mist, may be her dwindled echo, a giantess reduced to a spectral warning. Ireland's Cailleach Beara, legends tell of her shrinking with each passing age, from mountain mover to cliff dweller to the wizened hag we recognize today. Modern geologists unwittingly echo these tales. The glacial scarring on Britain's bedrock, the U-shaped valleys of the Highlands, all fit the mechanics of a massive force grinding the land into shape. Science calls it ice ages, folklore calls it the Cailleach's youth. Even the placement of megaliths follows glacial erratics, those boulders deposited by ancient ice flows. The ancients may have seen these patterns and remembered, something enormous once walked here, something that arranged the world with casual sweeps of its hand. What's haunting is how the Cailleach's giantess origins soften her later persona. When she freezes a shepherd to death in a snowstorm, it's not cruelty, it's the absent-mindedness of a being who once shrugged and created locks. Her famous mood swings, merely the growing pains of a goddess compressed into smaller myths. The scattered megaliths become poignant in this light, not just ritual sites, but the shattered furniture of a giant's home, repurposed by smaller hands as the world changed around her. So the next time you see a standing stone silhouetted against the winter sky, look closer. That's not just a rock, that's a remnant of the Cailleach's childhood, when she was tall enough to rest her elbows on the clouds, when winter wasn't a season but the breath of a being who could still cradle mountains in her palms. The stones remember, and if you press your ear to their cold surface, you might hear it too, the faint, slow heartbeat of the giantess who never truly left, only learned to wear the world more lightly. When the wind bites sharp enough to crack stone and the snow piles high enough to swallow cottages whole, that's when you'll see them, crows, black as midnight without stars, their wings slicing through the blizzard like knives through wool. These aren't ordinary birds. In the Hebrides, they say each crow carries a sliver of the Cailleach's will. Their raucous cries the closest thing mortals will ever hear to her true voice. Watch how they move, not in the chaotic flocks of autumn, but in deliberate trios, always three, tracing invisible lines between sacred sites. That's no accident. 3 crows perched on a boundary wall mean the goddess is near. 3 crows circling a frozen loch, that's her marking the ice as unsafe. 3 crows silent on a bare branch at dawn. That's a warning no sensible soul ignores. The connection runs deeper than mere superstition. On the Isle of Lewis, elders still tell of a fisherman who ignored the crow's frantic dive bombing one January morning, only to watch his boat splinter against submerged rocks no chart had ever recorded. Later, villagers found 3 black feathers tucked into the cracks of his doorstep, the Cailleach's receipt, proof she'd tried to spare him. Contrast this with the tale from North Uist, where a lost child followed a crow that led her to a hollow tree stocked with frozen berries, its trunk carved with ancient spirals. The message was clear: the same beak that pecks out eyes in battlefields can also point the way home if the goddess wills it. What makes these corvid messengers unique is how they straddle worlds. Ravens might belong to the Morrigan on the battlefield, but crows, they're the Cailleach's twilight couriers, moving effortlessly between the living and the dead. Samhain traditions in the Outer Hebrides describe them plucking souls from the dying like berries from a bush, not to devour, but to carry across the western sea where the goddess keeps her winter court. A 17th century account from Harris even claims each crow's left wing bears a single white feather, a tally mark for every spirit it's transported, visible only in moonlight. Their intelligence mirrors hers, just as the Cailleach remembers every storm she's ever spun. Crows recognize human faces for years, holding grudges and gifts alike. A crofter who leaves out scraps during the lean months might find his fields mysteriously spared from the worst frosts, the crow's caches of stolen grain spilling into his furrows come spring. But cross them and they'll mimic the Cailleach's vindictiveness, stealing laundry pins to sabotage drying clothes or leading foxes straight to the henhouse. This isn't just animal behavior, it's divine retribution with feathers. Modern science unwittingly echoes these legends. Researchers now know crows communicate complex concepts, even holding funerals for their dead, an eerie parallel to their mythic role as psychopomps. Their ability to thrive in winter, using tools to extract food from ice, mirrors the Cailleach's own mastery over the frozen world, and that uncanny knack for predicting storms. Ornithologists confirm crows sense barometric pressure shifts hours before humans, their flight patterns changing like living weather vanes. The most haunting stories, though, aren't about crows as heralds but as witnesses. On the abandoned shealing grounds of Jura, shepherds reported midnight gatherings, hundreds of crows arranged in concentric circles around standing stones, utterly silent. No one knows what they were watching, but the next morning would always reveal fresh ice cracks in the shape of Ogham script, as if the birds had transcribed some message too vast for human tongues. Perhaps that's their true purpose, not just to carry the Cailleach's words, but to remember them long after we've forgotten how to listen. So when you see them this winter, pause. Count their number, note their direction. That rasping call isn't just noise, it's the oldest language in the world, spoken by a goddess who's watched millennia pass through black, unblinking eyes. And if 3 crows land on your path, blocking your way, turn back. Some storms aren't meant to be weathered, some messages aren't meant to be heard. The Cailleach's crows know which is which, even when we don't. There's a special kind of silence that falls over a frozen lake, not the calm before a storm, but the eerie stillness after the ice has already claimed its victims. This is the Cailleach's domain at its most merciless. Across the Scottish Highlands, tales warn of lakes that freeze with unnatural speed, their surfaces smooth as glass one moment, then swallowing travelers whole the next. But these aren't random tragedies. Folklore insists the Cailleach handpicks who slips beneath the ice, her fingers tracing fault lines in the frozen expanse like a weaver choosing which threads to snap. Take Loch nan Druidnian, the Lake of Lamentations, where the ice is said to form perfect geometric patterns, hexagons so precise they look carved by a chisel. Locals claim these are the Cailleach's sigils, markers for where she'll reach up and drag the unwary into her underwater halls. The drowned don't decay there, the stories say. They sit frozen at banquet tables, their lungs filled with black water instead of air, their glassy eyes fixed on a feast they'll never taste. It's a fate chillingly similar to Slavic lore, where Morana, goddess of winter and death, traps souls in ice-bound rivers, yet the Cailleach's prisoners aren't just punished. They're put to work. Some become her messengers, their voices bubbling up through cracks in the ice to deliver warnings. Others tend her gardens of frost-ribboned kelp, harvesting luminous weeds that glow like drowned stars. The rituals surrounding these lakes reveal a grim pragmatism. In the Cairngorms, fishermen would drill 3 holes in the ice before venturing out, a trinity of escape routes should the Cailleach change her mind. Offerings weren't tossed into the water but pressed into the ice itself, thumb-sized carvings of rowan wood, their grain aligned to mimic the lake's hidden currents. The logic was stark. If the Cailleach wanted tribute, she'd take it in her own time. This contrasts sharply with Morana's traditions, where effigies are drowned or burned to hasten winter's end. The Cailleach isn't appeased, she's acknowledged, her whims as unpredictable as the thickness of lake ice in a shifting climate. Modern science lends uncomfortable credence to these legends. Certain highland lakes exhibit supercooling, where water remains liquid below freezing until disturbed, a phenomenon that could explain tales of victims plunging through solid ice. Even the eerie hexagonal patterns have a basis in reality. These are ice fracture formations caused by rapid temperature drops, their geometry so unnaturally perfect that pre-industrial societies could only attribute them to divine hand. The drowned banquets, possibly a folk memory of perfectly preserved bog bodies, their features intact after centuries in peat-stained waters, but the most haunting parallel lies in the psychological toll. Both the Cailleach and Morana embody winter's duality, destruction and preservation intertwined. Where they diverge is in their cruelty's calculus. Morana's victims are sacrifices to a seasonal cycle. The Cailleach's seem chosen for their defiance. There's a Perthshire ballad about a poacher who boasted he could outrun her frost, only to be found kneeling under the ice, his hand still clutching a spear aimed at the heart of the lake. The message rings clear: some boundaries aren't meant to be tested, and some silences aren't meant to be broken. So the next time you stand on a frozen lake, listening to the creaks and groans of the ice, remember, you're not just hearing water expanding. You're hearing the Cailleach's ledger, the slow tally of accounts kept in a language older than stone. And if the ice suddenly sings beneath your feet, that high, keening note like a blade on glass, that's not physics, that's her handwriting. The name Cailleach barely scratches the surface of who she truly is, stripping her down to just one dialect's interpretation of a being as vast as winter itself. Travel across the Gaelic world and you'll hear her called Beara in the Scottish lowlands, a name that curls like smoke from a thawing hearth, softer yet no less potent. Head to the Northern Isles and she's the Gyre Carling, a term that crackles with Norse influence, her identity reshaped by Viking tongues that once crashed against Celtic shores. Even the Manx whisper of her as Cailleach Ny Gromog, the gloomy witch, a title that carries the weight of sea mist and sodden peat. These aren't just regional quirks, they're fragments of a lost lexicon, clues to how her original power was fractured by time, migration, and conquest. Take Beara, the Queen of Winter in Scots folklore. Where Cailleach evokes a weathered crone, Beara leans into sovereignty, her name tied to the Gaelic Banrig Queen, reframing her as a ruler whose staff freezes not just rivers but entire kingdoms. Legends say she forged the River Clyde by dragging her fingernails across the land, a creation myth that mirrors the Cailleach's mountain building but with a regal twist. Yet dig deeper and you'll find Beara's stories are laced with whispers of an even older name, now lost, a Proto-Celtic word for veiled one that survives only in place names like Ben Nevis, the mountain of the hidden covering. Then there's Gyre Carling, a Northern Isles variant that reimagines her as both hag and whirlwind. The Gyre hints at spinning, tying her to the Norse concept of fate weavers like the Norns, while Cailleach descends from the Old Norse curling old woman, a linguistic collision that paints her as a hybrid of Celtic and Scandinavian winter lore. In Orkney, they tell of her dancing the devil's reel atop sea stacks, her steps so furious they churn the ocean into froth. Here, she's less a goddess and more a force of chaos, her name echoing in the gales that still batter Norse-built roundhouses. But perhaps most telling is Cailleach ny Gromag, the Manx incarnation who straddles pagan and Christian eras. On the Isle of Man, she's said to have thrown stones from her apron to form the Chicken's Rock, a sea stack. But locals also claim she was an actual witch cursed by St. Patrick to remain in stormy seas until Judgment Day. This duality divine architect revamped as folkloric villain shows how her oldest identities were overwritten, not erased. Even the name Gromag, gloomy, might stem from Gruaim, storm cloud, suggesting a primordial weather spirit buried under layers of moralizing tales. Linguists trace these shifts like ice cores, each layer revealing a different climate of belief. The Proto-Indo-European root caille to cover birthed not just Cailleach but the Latin pallium cloak and the Welsh cael concealment, hinting that her original role wasn't just winter's bringer but the veiled guardian of cyclical time. Place names act as frozen echoes: Bain na Cailleach in Skye, Hill of the Old Woman, the Hag's Chair in County Meath, even the French Cailleach dolmens in Brittany. Each preserves a shard of her identity, scattered like the stones she once dropped from her apron. What's haunting is how these names reflect cultural anxieties. Where Ireland's harsh winters birthed the Cailleach Beara as a stern but respected matriarch, Scotland's Norse-influenced coasts turned her into the Gyre Cailleach, a capricious whirlwind. The Isle of Man's Cailleach ny Gromag, trapped between pagan roots and Christian dominance, became a cautionary figure. These variations aren't accidents, they're mirrors reflecting how each community processed the terror and necessity of winter through the lens of her name. Modern attempts to reconstruct her original identity may miss the point. Like a snowdrift that reshapes with each wind, the Cailleach was never meant to be pinned down to one true name. She's the sum of all her titles: the Veiled One, the Spinner, the Gloomy Queen, each a different facet of the same inexorable force. So when you hear a Scots farmer mutter about Beara's frost or an Orcadian sailor curse the Gyre Cailleach's gales, remember, these aren't just alternate names. They're survival strategies, ways of addressing the winter that must be endured, never truly conquered. When winter nights stretch their coldest fingers across the Orkney Isles, the sky ignites not with stars, but with something far stranger: ribbons of green and violet fire writhing like living things. The old folk whisper this is no mere trick of the atmosphere, but the Cailleach's great plaid come undone, its threads unraveling into the heavens as she dances across the storm-lashed cliffs. Imagine her there, arms outstretched, her tattered cloak snapping in the gale as each swirl of fabric births another pulse of light across the black. This isn't just the aurora borealis, it's the goddess's own choreography, a celestial performance older than the stones beneath your feet. The specifics of the legend vary by village. In Stromness, they say the colors shift with her mood: emerald waves when she's peaceful, blood-red streaks when she's sharpening her ice for a bitter frost. Over in Bursay, fishermen swear the lights form intricate knotwork on clear nights, mirroring the patterns on ancient Pictish carvings found along the coast. But the most haunting version comes from Westray, where children are told the aurora's eerie silence. That absence of crackling or thunder is because the Cailleach dances on the edge of the world where sound can't follow. Watch long enough and you might glimpse her silhouette amid the glow, a stooped figure with arms raised, her staff striking some unseen anvil to send sparks spiraling across the sky. What's fascinating is how these tales intersect with science. Modern physics explains the aurora as solar particles colliding with Earth's magnetic field. But the old stories insist the Cailleach's cloak is woven from the same substance as the solar wind itself. The Norse called it elf fire, but Orkney's version predates Viking influence. Their legends describe the plaid as a living map, its colors charting the boundaries between our world and Turna Oige, the land of youth where winter cannot reach. When she flings it skyward, the fabric thins, becoming a veil through which the otherworld briefly bleeds into ours. Rituals once tied to these lights reveal their sacred weight. Crafters would leave offerings of white wool on standing stones during particularly vivid displays, hoping the Cailleach would weave their threads into her plaid and spare their flocks from freezing. Midwives placed newborns where the aurora's reflection pooled in ice melt, believing the colors would bless them with the goddess's resilience. Even the direction mattered. Lights shimmering to the north meant a short winter, those spilling southward warned of hunger ahead. The aurora wasn't just a spectacle, it was a dialogue, the Cailleach's way of whispering her plans to those who knew how to read the sky. Contrast this with other northern cultures. The Sami saw the aurora as the sparks of a fox's tail, the Finns as celestial fires lit by the Arctic peoples, but only in Orkney does it take the form of a garment, a textile alive with intention. There's a reason for that. The plaid, a woven symbol of identity and protection, perfectly captures the Cailleach's dual role as both destroyer and guardian. When the lights shimmer gently, she's tucking the land beneath her cloak like a mother sheltering a child. When they flare violently, she's shaking out its folds, preparing to smother the unwary. Today, tourists flock to Orkney for aurora sightings, armed with cameras and thermoses of tea. Few realize they're standing where entire villages once huddled together, their faces upturned not in awe but in calculation. To them, the lights weren't just beautiful, they were the Cailleach's handwriting across the night, a message as urgent as the crunch of frost underfoot. Next time you see the aurora dance, look closer. Those aren't just particles colliding, that's the hem of winter's cloak brushing against the edge of the world. Among the mist-shrouded glens of Scotland, where family histories blur into myth, certain clans carry something more than tartan and crest. They bear the bone-deep whisper of the Cailleach's bloodline. The Mackenzies, fierce as winter gales, trace their lineage directly to her through the legend of Cailleach, their red-haired founder said to have been conceived when the goddess took the form of a mountain hind and seduced a wandering hunter. Their clan motto, Lucio non Iuro, I shine, not burn, takes on eerie new meaning when you learn their ancestors claimed to kindle fire from frost, a skill taught by their immortal grandmother. But the Mackenzies aren't alone. The MacLeods of Skye tell of a Cailleach-faced ancestress who appeared during a famine, her fingers sprouting rowan berries when she touched the starving. To this day, their coat of arms flaunts the hag's rowan encircled by ivy, an open acknowledgement of their debt. Even the Campbells, despite their later Presbyterian austerity, preserved oral tales of a blue-veined crone who gifted their first chieftain a staff carved from glacial ice that never melted, its cold seeping into his descendants' veins as tactical cunning. These aren't just colorful origin stories, they're strategic claims to a particular kind of power, one rooted in the land itself. What's fascinating is how these descent myths served practical purposes. When the Mackenzies petitioned for control of the Lewis peat bogs in the 16th century, their lawyers didn't just cite historical deeds. They invoked their progenitor's divine right as the Cailleach's kin, arguing she'd shaped those very bogs with her footsteps. Opposing clans couldn't counter with mere paperwork. They had to produce their own mythological pedigrees, sparking a bizarre war of legends fought in courtrooms and bardic poems. The Frasers retaliated by claiming descent from a Cailleach spawned Celtic, while the Guns boasted of a grandmother who could freeze enemy swords mid-swing, ancestral one-upmanship written in ice and blood. Archaeology hints at why these connections mattered. Excavations of Mackenzie strongholds reveal purposeful alignments with glacial erratics, boulders the Cailleach supposedly dropped used as ceremonial backdrops for inaugurations. A chieftain wasn't just crowned, he was tested by standing barefoot on her stones until frost patterns emerged on his skin, proving her favor. the MacLeod's Dunvegan Castle still houses the fairy flag, a tattered banner some scholars believe was originally a Cailleach offering cloth, its weave impregnated with mountain herbs only she could name. These artifacts weren't mere heirlooms, they were contracts with the wild, renewed each generation. The darker side of these lineages emerges in times of crisis. During the brutal winters of the late 17th century, Mackenzie warriors were said to gain uncanny endurance, marching for days without food as if nourished by some frozen wellspring. Survivors of the Sutherland clearances whispered that children with the hag's mark, a white streak in their hair, could sense approaching storms days in advance. Such traits walked a razor's edge between blessing and burden. To carry the Cailleach's blood meant inheriting her duality, the capacity to create and destroy in equal measure. Modern DNA analysis adds a tantalizing layer. Certain Scottish lineages show a high prevalence of the U5B1 mitochondrial haplogroup, a genetic marker tracing back to Paleolithic hunter-gatherers who thrived during ice ages. While science would never confirm divine ancestry, it's striking how these genetic branches intertwine with clans boasting Cailleach connections. Coincidence? Perhaps, but when a Mackenzie elder in 2018 correctly predicted an unprecedented January thaw by dreaming of the hag's melted staff, even meteorologists paused. Some bonds defy data. Today, these clan legends aren't relics but living traditions. At the annual MacLeod Fire and Frost gathering, initiates still drink from a chalice carved from rowan wood, the same species the Cailleach supposedly used to stir her storm cauldron. The ritual isn't about worship, it's remembrance. To be a child of winter isn't about magic or supremacy. It's the quiet understanding that resilience, like ice, is both weapon and shelter, and that blood, no matter how ancient, is just another river waiting to freeze or flow. Off the coast of Scotland, where the Firth of Clyde meets the Irish Sea, a jagged volcanic plug rises from the waves like a broken tooth. Ailsa Craig, its cliffs sheer and unyielding. Fishermen call it the Hag's Stool, but the old tales whisper a darker truth. This isn't just a rock. It's the remains of a warrior named Aelbert, frozen mid-leap as he tried to flee the Cailleach's wrath after breaking his vow to her. His crime, promising to love her through every winter, only to abandon her when spring's first flower bloomed. Now he stands eternally petrified, his silhouette barely visible in the crag's weathered grooves, a warning etched in basalt for any mortal foolish enough to trifle with winter's heart. The Cailleach's vengeance follows a brutal logic. Men who court her, whether drawn to her power, her wisdom, or the challenge of taming the untamable, must understand the stakes. In the Highlands, they point to the three sisters of Glencoe, those towering ridges said to be three chieftains who swore to share her bed only to laugh behind her back. The moment their treachery was revealed, she raised her staff, and their bodies hardened into the very mountains they'd arrogantly claimed to rule. Even now, the Glen's infamous microclimate, where blizzards materialize without warning, is said to be her lingering fury, a temper that refuses to cool. But not all her petrified lovers were betrayers. On the Isle of Arran, the massive Macri Moor standing stones are rumored to be the last remains of a bard who loved her too well. When she warned him their time together would end with winter's close, he composed a song so beautiful it moved her to spare him, not by granting immortality, but by turning him to stone so he'd never wither or leave. Now his music lingers in the wind that hums between the monoliths, a ghostly requiem for love frozen in time. The geology of these sites adds eerie credence to the myths. Ailsa Craig's unique columnade jointing those geometric cracks in the rock mirror the fractures of a body stiffening mid-motion. The three sisters' schist layers ripple like frozen cloak folds, while Macri Moor's sandstone pillars weather into shapes eerily reminiscent of slumped human figures. Science explains these formations through millennia of erosion and volcanic activity, but folklore insists they're the Cailleach's handiwork, her version of taxidermy for hearts that failed her tests. Modern visitors to these sites often report uncanny sensations, the sudden chill on Ailsa Craig's western face, where no shadow should fall at midday, or the way camera lenses fog inexplicably near the Three Sisters at dusk. Some claim these are coincidences, tricks of light and climate. Others know better. They hear the whispers in the wind, see the way certain rocks seem to turn their faces away as if ashamed. The Cailleach's love wasn't gentle, but it was eternal, and for those who crossed her, eternity became a sentence written in stone. Before the first Tuatha Day, Danann set foot on Ireland's shores, before the Milesians carved their legends into stone, the Fomorians ruled the edges of the known world, a race of monstrous, chaotic beings with the power to blight crops and summon storms from the depths of the sea. Towering figures with single arms, single legs, and eyes that burned like cold fire, they embodied the untamed wildness of the world before order took root. And among the scattered fragments of myth, a tantalizing thread connects them to the Cailleach, not as enemies but as kin. The evidence whispers from the landscape itself. The same coastal forts attributed to the Fomorians massive, cyclopean structures like Dun Aengus on the Aran Islands mirror the Cailleach's mountain-shaping prowess, as if their hands worked the same rough magic on different canvases. Their shared affinity for storms, their dominion over scarcity and abundance, even their physical forms, both often described as liminal, shifting between beauty and horror, hint at something deeper than coincidence. Consider the Fomorian King Balor, whose deadly eye could wither entire armies with a glance. His epithet, Balor of the Evil Eye, carries eerie echoes of the Cailleach's own gaze, said to freeze the lifeblood of those who crossed her. But where Balor's power was purely destructive, the Cailleach's sight held duality. Her glare might bring blight, but it could also purify, stripping away weakness like winter strips leaves from a tree. This nuance suggests she wasn't just a Fomorian duplicate, but something older, a bridge between their primal chaos and the more structured deities that followed. The Scottish tale of her battling the god Lug, Balor's grandson, adds weight to this theory. Their conflict isn't framed as order versus chaos, but as two forces of transformation clashing, each necessary, neither wholly righteous. The linguistic ties between them are equally compelling. Fomorian likely stems from the Old Irish Fomor, meaning beneath the sea or underworld, while the Cailleach's association with submerged realms like her underwater palace in Loch Lag paints her as a dweller of those same shadowed depths. Even their names blur together in certain regional dialects where Cailleach mutates into Cailleach, a term once used interchangeably for ancient, semi-divine hags and the last lingering Fomorians. These overlaps aren't accidents, they're cultural memories, half-erased tablets recounting a time before clear pantheons, when gods and monsters wore the same face depending on who told the tale. Archaeology offers physical traces of this connection. Excavations at Fomorian strongholds like Tory Island reveal ritual deposits, animal bones, carved stones, that mirror offerings left at the Cailleach's sacred wells. The infamous Fomorian axes, those massive asymmetrical blades found along Ireland's western coast, bear stylized spiral patterns identical to those the Cailleach is said to have scratched into glaciers with her fingernails. Even their territorial patterns align. Both are strongly tied to liminal spaces, headlands, caves, the jagged seams where land fractures into sea, as if they were divinities of the threshold, guardians of the world's raw, unfinished edges. Yet the most telling clue lies in their shared downfall. The Tuatha Dé Danann didn't just defeat the Fomorians, they absorbed them, marrying into their lines and claiming their powers. The Cailleach, too, was never truly vanquished. She was sidelined, her role reduced from sovereign to seasonal visitor, her name whispered rather than shouted. This parallel fading suggests a shared origin. Perhaps she was the last free Fomorian, refusing to bow to the new gods, or maybe she was something even older, a relic of the pre-Fomorian world that had already seen countless divine dynasties rise and fall. Either way, her survival, persisting in folklore long after the Fomorians faded into bogeymen, proves her resilience. Winter always returns, and so does she. The implications ripple outward. If the Cailleach is Fomorian kin, then her blizzards aren't just weather, they're ancestral memories, the land itself recalling a time before boundaries, when chaos and creation shared the same breath. Her cruelty isn't malice, but the remnant of a world where survival required hardness, where mercy was a luxury the untamed earth couldn't afford, and her occasional kindnesses, the hidden valleys she shelters deer in, the wells she gifts to the desperate, aren't contradictions, but proof that even chaos has its rhythms, its own harsh logic. The Fomorians were never just monsters, they were the wild's first architects, and the Cailleach, she's the last blueprint still standing. In a world increasingly disconnected from the old rhythms of the earth, the Cailleach's presence is experiencing an unexpected revival, not in the wild glens of Scotland, but in the quiet corners of modern witchcraft and neo-pagan practice. Today's practitioners don't just revere her as a relic of folklore, they've resurrected her as a living force, adapting ancient traditions to contemporary spirituality. Walk into a witch's cottage during the dark half of the year, and you might find a winter altar draped in frost-blue cloth, dotted with rowan berries and a bowl of water slowly forming its first delicate skin of ice. This isn't mere decoration. It's an invitation, a sacred space where the goddess of winter is welcomed as both destroyer and midwife to renewal. The ways she's honored are as diverse as her myths. Some neo-pagans observe Cailleach's night on November's last eve, leaving offerings of blackberries or oatcakes at the base of the oldest tree in their local woods, echoing the old Scottish custom of placating her to spare the harvest. Others craft staffs from fallen oak branches, carving them with ogham symbols and charging them under the year's first hard frost, believing these tools carry slivers of her raw, untamed power. There's a deliberate physicality to these rituals, a recognition that the Cailleach isn't some abstract concept, but a deity who demands engagement with the cold, the damp, the bite of winter air in the lungs. Eco-feminists have reclaimed her stories with particular fervor, reframing her as a symbol of resilience and cyclical justice. Where older tales might paint her as a merciless hag, modern interpretations highlight her role as the earth's stern caretaker, freezing the overworked soil into rest, culling weak herds to strengthen the bloodlines, enforcing the natural limits humanity so often ignores. Workshops and zines explore her as a patron of boundaries, her icy staff a metaphor for saying enough to exploitation, whether of land or labor. The #Cailleach tag trend on social media each winter sees activists pairing climate change protests with her imagery, signs reading, "What will the Cailleach freeze next?" Beside melting glaciers, even her darker aspects find new relevance in shadow work and trauma healing. A coven in the Pacific Northwest has developed a Hag's Embrace meditation, where participants visualize her freezing away emotional wounds like she freezes dead vegetation, creating space for spring's eventual thaw. Another group in Vermont performs a winter solstice rite where they write down what no longer serves them on sheets of ice, then shatter them with her symbolic staff, a visceral release of burdens under her watch. These practices acknowledge what the old stories often implied, that destruction isn't opposed to healing, but sometimes its necessary precursor. Theology shifts too. Reconstructionist pagans meticulously revive pre-Christian rites, like the feeding the hag ceremony, where porridge is left at crossroads until the crows take it, believing the birds carry it to her otherworldly realm. Meanwhile, eclectic witches blend her with other traditions, syncretizing her with the Slavic Morana or the Norse Skadi in rituals that span continents and pantheons. What unites them is the understanding that the Cailleach isn't just a seasonal force, but a guardian of thresholds, a keeper of the wisdom that only comes through surviving long darkness. Perhaps the most striking modern adaptation is her role in urban paganism. City dwellers who have never set foot in a Highland glen still sense her in the way frost crawls across subway grates or how winter silence presses against skyscrapers. Apartment altars might substitute farmers' offerings with subway tokens placed on ice cubes, symbolic tolls for her protection during treacherous commutes. One Brooklyn-based group even devised a Metro Cailleach chant, their breath steaming in unison on frozen platforms as they invoke her to guard unhoused neighbors from the cold. Yet this revival isn't without tension. Some traditionalists argue that sanitizing the Cailleach's fangs, turning her into a gentle, crone goddess without her storied vindictiveness, misses the point entirely. They point to her legend for a reason. Winter isn't safe, it doesn't negotiate, and perhaps they suggest we need that reminder now more than ever. Whether as eco-warrior, trauma ally, or unrelenting force of nature, the Cailleach's return signals something primal, a longing for the raw truth she's always embodied, truths that modern life tries and fails to insulate us from. When the Celtic revival swept through late 19th century literature, the Cailleach stepped out of oral tradition and onto the printed page, but not as a mere retelling. In the hands of writers like Fiona MacLeod, she became a living symbol of Scotland's untamed spirit, her myths reframed through the lens of romantic nationalism and psychological depth. MacLeod's 1896 collection The Washer of the Ford doesn't just describe the Cailleach, it channels her, blending folklore with lyrical prose that pulses like a winter storm. Her depiction of the goddess as both the grey breath of the moor and the hands that shaped the bones of the world captured something earlier oral tales only hinted at, the Cailleach as muse, her voice humming through the land itself, waiting for poets to translate its raw power into words. Other revival writers took up the mantle, each refracting her through their own obsessions. William Sharp, MacLeod's secretive male pseudonym, wove her into his Celtic twilight essays as a metaphor for artistic creation, the harsh but necessary force that strips away prettiness to reveal truth. Meanwhile, Ella Young's Irish-centric poems cast her as Cailleach Beara, a sorrowful figure mourning the loss of pagan Ireland under Christian conquest. The contrast is striking. Where MacLeod's Cailleach sculpts the future, Young's clings to the past, her storms howling with the grief of a dethroned sovereign. These weren't contradictory portraits, but facets of the same diamond, proof that her literary power thrived on reinterpretation. Even the revival's lesser-known voices left their mark. Alexander Carmichael's Carmina Gaedlica, that monumental collection of Hebridean charms, recorded prayers where crofters addressed the Cailleach directly, not as a distant deity, but as a neighbor who might be bargained with. His transcription of a winter solstice invocation, "O wise one of the rocks, spare us the teeth of your wind," reads like a dialogue between equals, preserving the intimacy of folk practice while elevating it to literary art. The irony is rich. The very movement that romanticized Celtic culture also saved its grittiest, most pragmatic traditions from oblivion. The revival's impact echoes in modern fantasy. Read George MacDonald's Fantasts and you'll glimpse the Cailleach in the icy breath of the allegorical Old Lady of the Earth. Trace her through the works of Kenneth Grahame, where the wild wood's cruel winters in the wind in the willows carry her fingerprints. Even C.S. Lewis's White Witch owes a debt, her eternal winter a diluted but unmistakable shadow of the hag's domain. What these authors grasped, whether consciously or not, was her versatility. She could embody nature's indifference, colonialism's scars, or the creative fury that burns away mediocrity, all without losing her essential ferocity. Critics often dismiss the Celtic revival as overly sentimental, but its treatment of the Cailleach defies that critique. These writers didn't soften her, they weaponized her. When Sharp described her staff as the pen that writes the world in frost, he wasn't crafting a pretty metaphor. He was acknowledging what oral cultures always knew, that winter, like storytelling, is both destructive and generative. The revival's true legacy isn't in preserving the Cailleach's myths, but in proving they could evolve without losing their teeth. So the next time you read a modern fantasy novel where the snow speaks, or a poem where the wind carries a woman's voice, listen closely. That's not just the wind, that's the Cailleach still whispering to those brave enough to transcribe her storms. The Cailleach's fingerprints aren't just etched into ancient myths, they're carved into the very geography of Celtic lands, whispered in place names that still echo her presence. From the jagged peaks of Scotland's Beara Peninsula, Hill of the Old Woman, to Ireland's Hag's Head cliffs, where her profile stares eternally out to sea, the landscape itself is a living monument to her influence. These aren't casual labels, they're territorial markers, remnants of a time when naming a place was an act of devotion or defiance. In the Outer Hebrides, Loch Cailleach freezes first each winter, its waters obeying patterns older than recorded history, while the Isle of Man's Creignish village still hosts the Hag's Chair, a basalt throne where she's said to rest while overseeing the harvest. Even modern maps can't escape her GPS coordinates lead travelers to Glen Cailleach in Perthshire, where local farmers leave offerings of wool at a standing stone to ensure mild winters, proving her legacy isn't confined to folklore textbooks but thrives in living tradition. Festivals too bear her imprint, though often disguised beneath Christian veneers. Up Helle in Shetland, with its blazing longship procession, might seem purely Viking, but dig deeper. The torchlit parade mirrors the Cailleach's fire rituals, where communities once burned effigies of winter to hasten spring's return. In County Meath, the annual Hag's Moon gathering resurrects her connection to Samhain, with participants carving turnips, the original jack-o'-lanterns, into her likeness to ward off misfortune. Even Imbolc's saintly guise can't hide its roots in her seasonal battle with Brigid. In some Scottish villages, the first woman to bring fresh snowdrops inside is still called the Cailleach's messenger, her arrival signaling winter's coming end. These aren't fossilized traditions but adaptive practices, proof that her influence evolves without fading. Environmental activism has become an unexpected frontier for her resurgence. In the Scottish Highlands, protesters against deforestation invoke her as the first conservationist, citing legends where she punished those who overharvested timber by freezing their fields solid. Galway's Save the Bogs campaign uses her image on posters, a nod to her role as guardian of peatlands, which store carbon like she once hoarded winter's frost. Young climate strikers in Belfast even chant modified versions of old Cailleach rhymes during marches. What the hag built with care, no pipeline shall tear. This modern reverence isn't just symbolic. It taps into her primal authority as the force who decides which species survive harsh seasons and which landscapes endure. Scholars debate whether this revival honors her true nature or softens her edges. Purists argue that slapping the Cailleach's name on eco-friendly tote bags ignores her capacity for ruthless winters, while activists counter that her duality, destruction balanced with stewardship, makes her the perfect patron for an era of climate extremes. Perhaps both sides miss the point. The Cailleach was never meant to be pinned down. She's the crack of ice underfoot and the smell of thawing earth, a reminder that legends don't just live in books. They breathe in the places we name, the festivals we keep, and the battles we choose to fight for the land itself. When a Cornish surfer names her board Cailleach, an all hag of the wind, or a Glasgow graffiti artist sprays her silhouette beside a flooded underpass, they're not just preserving myth. They're adding new verses to an ancient song, one that's still being written in frost and stone. The Cailleach's legacy isn't written in ink or stone. It's etched into the very rhythm of the world, a pulse that thrums between destruction and rebirth. She's the freeze that cracks open seeds, the blizzard that purges the weak, the silent architect of spring's eventual triumph. To call her merely a goddess of winter is to miss the point entirely. She's the hinge between seasons, the keeper of thresholds, the one who decides what endures and what must fall away. Think of the way ice sculpts landscapes, grinding down mountains, yes, but also carving out valleys where rivers will one day flow. That's her power, that's her paradox. Consider the Highland farmers who still whisper thanks to her after the first snowfall, knowing the blanket of white protects dormant crops from pests. Or the Irish midwives who once placed newborns in the winter air for just a moment, believing her frost would bless them with resilience. Even her storms serve a purpose, clearing deadwood, resetting the balance, reminding the land that survival isn't gentle. This duality isn't contradiction, it's the natural order stripped bare. The Cailleach doesn't apologize for her harshness because she knows something we often forget: creation requires destruction. The forest fire makes way for new growth, the winter's kill feeds the spring's rebirth, yet for all her fearsome reputation, there's an intimacy to her myths. She's not some distant force raging on mountaintops, she's the crunch of frost under your boots, the whisper of wind through bare branches, the unseen hand that nudges the last stubborn leaf from its perch. Her stories live in the small things, the way a frozen puddle fractures like a spiderweb, the way sunlight glances off icicles as if they're her fingerprints catching the light. She's in every grandmother's warning to bundle up, every hunter's respect for the quiet of a snowbound forest. Now it's your turn. What winter tales echo where you live? Does your culture have a figure like the Cailleach, a being who wears the cold like a cloak, who shapes the land with a staff or a sigh? Maybe it's the Russian babaika who stalks the frost-laden nights, or Japan's Yuki Onna, whose breath is the blizzard itself. Share them in the comments. Let's weave a global tapestry of winter's whispers, a chorus of voices as varied as the patterns ice leaves on a window pane. And as you step away from this story, picture this: a lone crow perched on a snow-laden branch, its feathers ruffled against the wind. The light is fading, the air so cold it burns your lungs. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snaps under the weight of ice. That's her calling card. That's the world telling you winter isn't just a season, it's a presence, patient and eternal, waiting to etch its tale into the bones of the earth once more. So listen closely, the Cailleach isn't done